Seth.
Thank you. Good morning. When Abby invited me to participate in BJ's virtual Pride programming, I promptly said yes. As the board chair of Keshet, I think about the intersection of Jewish and LGBTQ identity a lot. I think about our Shabbatonim for LGBTQ teens, where they don't need to leave any part of their identity at the door. I think about our institutional change work, the work that we do with day schools, JCCs, federations, and shoals, including BJ, to support those institutions in becoming places where LGBTQ youth, families, and staff are affirmed. And I think about our advocacy work, mobilizing Jewish communities around the country to leverage our voices in support of LGBTQ rights. But to be honest, I've thought a lot less in recent years about my own connection to prayer, God, and Judaism, and how it's affected by my queer and trans identity. In this week's Parsha, Korach, we have the prototype of the demagogue leading the rebellion against Moshe. Let's just say it doesn't go very well for him. But what was his real sin? Torah is not against rebellion in principle. The exodus from Egypt was essentially a rebellion. But that's not what Korach and his entire family got swallowed up by the earth for. Korach's real sin was conflating equality with sameness. At the heart of Korach's argument is that everyone is the same, that we're all identical, even interchangeable. We were all at Sinai, we all heard God's voice, we all are holy, and therefore there's no need for special leaders. The argument is colorfully illuminated in one midrash, where Korach and the others ask Moshe if a wool talit dyed with techelet requires tzitzit to be added, as directed by God at the conclusion of last week's parsha. If the garment or talit itself is all blue, like the blue cord of the tzitzit, Korach and his comrades reasoned, the blue cord of the tzitzit is redundant, no? If the objective is to reflect upon the single thread of blue, then that single blue thread is surely unnecessary if you have an entirely blue garment. But Moshe answered in the affirmative. The tzitzit are still necessary. While they are both blue, equal in color, as it were, the tzitzit have their own function. They are not the same as the garment, whether the same color or a different color. I grew up upstate. No, actual upstate, Albany, not Westchester, and spent most of my young life davening at a conservative shul. My Jewish identity has always been central to me. And while there have been times in my life when I've been more or less observant, felt closer to or further away in my relationship to God, being Jewish has always been a primary part of who I am. In only the way women's studies majors could do, when I came out in college, friends and I discussed our identities late into the night. A lesbian Jew, Jewish women-identified women, and that's women with a Y, a Jewish lesbian. We debated the politics of which part of our identity should come first, what it meant to put lesbian before Jew or Jew before lesbian, and considered the histories of oppression and marginalization of each group. Fast forward some years, somewhere around 1997, and I had become a regular morning Minyan goer at the shul of my childhood. Like BJ is for my kids here, this shul had been my home. It was a place where I went to Hebrew school, ran through the halls with my friends on Shabbat, played on the front lawn, became a bat mitzvah, and could tell you the exact number of stars on the ceiling in the main sanctuary. I would drag myself to the shul at 7 a.m., 6:45 Mondays and Thursdays. Each morning, we would start davening, and at some point before Kaddish and the Baruch Hu, the Shaliach Tzibor would turn to count. I dreaded that moment. There I stood, wrapped in my rainbow talit, short cropped hair and pants, waiting for the inevitable. He would count 10, turn back around, and just before resuming, the rabbi, whom I had known since my childhood, would stop him and shake his head. With a perplexed look, the Shaliach Tzibor would turn and count once again. And again, the rabbi would shake his head. You see, the shul of my youth was not yet egalitarian. Women typically did not attend morning minyan, except for an occasional mourner, and I did not count. I realized that if I was going to bother to get out of bed that early, I'd rather daven somewhere where my presence could make the difference between whether or not a mourner could say Kaddish, and where I could participate as a full-fledged person. There was another conservative shul in Albany. It was the egalitarian one, and I had heard a little about their then newish rabbi, Dan Ornstein. I also learned that a small group of gay and lesbian Jews were talking about approaching him about the shul's position on gay and lesbian Jews. I knew some of these folks from my activism in the broader LGBT community, and they invited me to join them for a meeting in the living room of a congregant's home with a board member to discuss. I will admit I was hesitant to go. The rabbi was allegedly going to be on vacation, and I was suspicious. How could anything really happen if he wasn't there? But I did go, and the meeting was positive, and there were follow-up meetings with Rabbi Ornstein that he was present for. He seemed optimistic, and he also seemed to be trying to figure out the best way to communicate his conviction that all members of the Jewish community are bound together historically and spiritually, and not alienate his congregation. To give some perspective on the timeline, JTS did not begin admitting out gay and lesbian rabbinical and cantorial students for another decade. And this was Albany, not the Upper West Side. From the Bima on Yom Kippur that year, less than 3 months after these initial conversations, Rabbi Ornstein publicly and explicitly welcomed gay and lesbian Jews and their families into the OHAV community, reminding the congregation that we were all at Sinai. When I transitioned in 2010, I was no longer living in Albany, but still returned most years for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There was a Chavra Minyan that came together for the Chagim, and it was a lovely traditional service that welcomed me and my family. I knew that I wanted to mark my transition Jewishly and asked the Minyan coordinators if they would be open to doing something. And because the Jewish community is such a small world, of course, one of the coordinators was Rabbi Michal Springer's sister-in-law. Michal reached out to Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, who was then at CBST. We selected brachot, and I took my first boy, Aliyah, nearly a decade ago on Rosh Hashanah. I am, no doubt, among the privileged. My queer and trans identity have only strengthened and nurtured my Jewish identity. You see, I believe it is my queer, trans, and Jewish identity that have enabled me to see with clarity, just as clearly as I see my tzitzit, that we, all the we's, Black, brown, white, queer, Jews, and non-Jews, are not the same, but equal. And perhaps just as important, like the tzitzit, that are there to remind us of all God's mitzvot, seeing the queer, the Black, and the brown Jews, the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and the Tony McDades, remind me what is important, and remembering what is important leads to action. Pride Sameach.